On March 28, 2026, educators, researchers, school leaders, and community advocates gathered for a landmark forum hosted by the CPAC Institute. Their shared purpose to strengthen equity and inclusion in Ontario education by integrating East and Southeast Asian Canadian experiences and by confronting anti-Asian racism. Opening the forum, CPAC Executive Director Andy Shih highlighted an important connection: anti-Asian racism and the underrepresentation of Asian Canadians in leadership are linked to gaps in the current education system.
We believe one of its root causes lies in education. Specifically, the lack of inclusive education that recognizes the histories and contributions of racialized Canadians. This gap contributes to the persistent bias of viewing Asian Canadians as perpetual foreigners.
He emphasized that addressing these root causes requires coordinated action across schools, communities, and policymakers. CPAC President Helen Chow reinforced this message, noting that the absence of East and Southeast Asian Canadian experiences in the curriculum is more than a content gap.
This is not just a gap in content, but a gap in representation and belongings.
The forum's keynote speaker, Dr. Kevin Kumashiro, an internationally recognized leader in equity and social justice education, presented 3 lenses for building educational capacity and addressing anti-Asian racism. He urged participants to understand the broader social and political context before moving to solutions. He encouraged educators to define problems for themselves rather than adopting dominant or distorted narratives. And he reminded the audience that real progress must go beyond individual sensitivity training to address the institutional and ideological structures that sustain racism.
Problems often play out at 3 different levels. And so when we try to change an institution or an organization or even a society, we actually need solutions that target all 3 levels: individual, institutional, and ideological.
This systemic perspective was further reinforced by the CPAC Institute's research report, Footnote in the Story. Presented by Dr. Bai-Ling Kate Zhang, the study found that East and Southeast Asian Canadian experiences remain severely underrepresented, inconsistently taught, and often reduced to token references. It also found that educators face limited training opportunities, insufficient resources, and policies that do not explicitly address anti-Asian racism.
Whether a school board has a high number of ESAC students or a very smaller one, the gaps in curriculum and the gaps in support remain remarkably consistent.
The message was clear: meaningful inclusion requires systemic change. The conversation then turned to action through a panel moderated by Dr. Keen Nam Lu, Superintendent of Education with the York Region District School Board. Genling Chang of Alpha Education called for stronger racial literacy and a clear connection between leadership commitments and everyday classroom realities. Carlo Cabrera of the Toronto District School Board emphasized accountability, ensuring anti-Asian racism is named, measured, and addressed in school improvement planning. Dr. Vidya Shah of the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, University of Toronto, introduced the idea of third spaces, where schools, academia, and communities collaborate in knowledge building, activism, and healing. Together, panelists highlighted the need for data-informed strategies, sustained professional learning, and strong partnerships across sectors. Participants then moved into breakout sessions focused on 6 priorities: curriculum and pedagogy, educator capacity building, institutional accountability, representation in leadership, cross-sector collaboration, and student mental health. These discussions generated practical recommendations and new ideas for advancing inclusive education in Ontario and beyond. The forum was not an endpoint, it was a beginning. Immediate outcomes included stronger awareness, new cross-sector relationships, and renewed momentum for change. Looking ahead, the CPAC Institute plans to continue collaborative dialogue and explore the creation of a dedicated working group to sustain progress. Because when students see themselves reflected in what they learn, education becomes more than information. it becomes a space for critical understanding, addressing racism and inequities, and building connection, engagement, and change.